Hello, how's everyone doing today? I am here with Victor Pross. Victor Pross is a caricaturist artist. Uh, he is also famously known as the second sexiest man on YouTube. How are you doing today?
Not too bad, Mr. First Sexy Man. Not too
All right, in my own mind.
bad.
So
An
you just had a
optimization on
debate.
sexy.
You just had a debate with Jen Helfeld. Why don't you share your thoughts? How did that go?
Well, yeah, no, with the technical difficulties and knowing what I was going into when it comes to bidding somebody like Dan Halfeld, I was true to form, expecting a barrage of conundrum ethics, the type you do find with the college students with their all-night smoke the weed, order pizza bowl sessions of discussing. Hey, does this blue? I wonder if this color blue means the same thing to me as it means to you, man. Hey, check the crayon box. But other than that, I thought that I did pretty well. I know that I once again, I feel I could have done better. I mean, anybody can say that. In hindsight, you can look at the debate and play it back and go, "Damn, I should have made this point or made that point." And one of the guys on the invite page, Mr. James Babb, he has a criticism, one that's heartfelt with a lot of love, though, and he says, "This Jan mopped up because he placed the burden of proof on you. He maneuvered you into defending all the potential problems of anarchism without having to defend the problem of statism. As I warned, the lack of a debate affirmation was a fatal flaw. There is never any way to explain how everything would work without the state. A properly constructed debate affirmation would place the burden of proof on with the positive theory, like government, etc., etc." And I just basically responded to that, and I said, "Well, hey, dude, like I tried to make these suggestions or objections even to Jan, but he just ignored me, and was his way or the highway. So I was placed in the affirmative position, whether I liked it or not. Just like the atheist is being placed in the affirmative position of having to prove that there's no God. So that's where I found myself so far as the setup was concerned. But other than that, though, like I'm sure that we'll dive into this in greater detail, though. But these lifeboat scenarios, man, this is. I mean, aside from not necessarily having a direct connection to the theme of the debate, anarchism versus constitutional government, or so-called limited government, lifeboat scenarios and ethical conundrums are kind of a separate subject, even though ethics, I believe, is very much a part of political theory, in that that is a normative discipline. But all these lifeboat scenarios, I've stated the criticism before, and I'll reiterate it now. Is that I feel that no matter how I would have answered to this question of would you steal the water if you were drunk, if I said no, I would not, because property rights is sacrosanct. Oh well, then you would sacrifice your life. And that's a terrible thing in objective ethics. Self-sacrifice, bad, 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 bad. And I'm holding up to a holy edifice, a floating abstraction of property rights not connected to my life. And if I had answered that, well, yes, in this case, I would violate the rights to save my life, then, yes, so you would violate rights then, Anarchy, see, that's the destruction. That's an inherent kernel of destruction and anarchism is the violation of rights. No matter how I would have answered that question, it would have been met with a critique.
I've said the same thing to him. And, I mean, there is this double standard where apparently, see, it's very safe to argue for limited government. Because if you argue for limited government, every bad thing government does, you say, hey, I'm not arguing for that type of government. I'm arguing for limited government. We don't have a limited government, but don't blame me. But if we have anarchy, but it's not the type of anarchy we advocate, well, suddenly we're responsible for that. So we're responsible for everything possible that will arise under anarchy, but he's not responsible for everything possible that will arise under the state, only his limited government state. And, you know, one of the questions he asked you was, are you willing to use risk getting nuclear bombed by some guy who has a nuclear bomb with an extortion note? And what what I was hoping, or, you know, a good answer in response to that is, are you willing to risk it? I mean, what's to stop some crazy dictator from using a nuclear bomb on another country? And I really don't understand why that can't happen in government. I mean, in government, no one's able to extort anyone. In government, we have this utopia where no one is stolen from, where no one is threatened with violence, where no rights are violated. I mean, really? The world you envision, all of civilization, is held in check by the government, really?
Well, yeah, you know, like the scenario was set up where the same kind of like so-called Socratic method of asking a series of specific probing questions to trap your opponent into a contradiction, or to demonstrate that the person doesn't really have valid knowledge, which is what was a part of the Socratic method. That whole method, his series of questions, could very well have been applied to another small government advocate who could have tripped up on the answers, or tripped up in the mind of the person asking the questions, of course, is however they want to spin it, because they have an agenda running. So it's not necessarily germane or indigenous to, you know, my anarchism or whatever. I mean, under a state of rest, as the scenario was set up to be that way, you know, in one case I could have very well, in an act of desperation, been overcome with panic or whatever, and do something very drastic that I would not normally do in sound mind, and by a matter of conviction, you know, that I would, in abstract state, no, I wouldn't do that. But there I am finding myself doing something contrary to my convictions under a state of duress. And that's what I try to make clear, that context matters. It really matters. And I've been accused of contradicting myself. You know, the example of, I'm lost in the woods, I'm dying of thirst. No context of how I got there, and or whatnot. You know, if I'm responsible for that situation, or I'm a victim of circumstance, or whatever. But I'm dying of thirst. It's in the woods. It's this lone guy that's all by himself, thousands of miles away from civilization. I don't know where I'm going. I don't have a compass. I could get lost, whatever. And if I was to violate his rights against his protests, I could very well be shot. There's a lot of things to consider, right? You know, but it's a different situation altogether. That if I'm drowning, you know, under the circumstance of like being really thirsty, like in the woods, I can calculate, well, should I really do this? Because I'd be met with some serious consequences if this guy tries to back up his protests of my taking the water. But if I'm drowning, though, and the guy in the woods could very well see me as an interloper, as somebody who's a threat to him. I could very well be the case. Now that's the context of that. But if I'm drowning, though, and I'm trying to clutch hold of a boat, it's an entirely different context. It's an entirely different context. Of course, I'm going to fight to the bitter end to try to save my life. And the person that's beat me off with a paddle, protesting or whatever, he doesn't see me as a threat to his property. I'm drowning. How can he see me as a threat to his property? That would have to be a case of somebody who was very mentally disturbed, or somebody who was just unbelievably, maliciously evil to do something like that. That would be the circumstances, and that's a very different context from premeditated intent to harm, take somebody, steal somebody's property, damage somebody's property. It's a very different context. But Jan just has this blanket categorical, a Kantian categorical imperative, which is anathema to objectivism, by the way, the Kantian and moral imperative. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not. But according to Kant, there's moral rules, such as don't lie, and that's it. Period. It's a categorical imperative. Don't lie. Lying is bad. It's like a series of commandments, regardless of the context. You could be lying yourself to get into a job, or to deceive somebody, or to or whatnot, or you could be
Victor,
lying.
Are you still there? I'm having
to
trouble
the.
hearing you. Oh, you're back.
Oh, you can't hear me? You can't hear me?
Victor, are you there? I'm having trouble hearing you.
I'm here.
Oh, sorry. Can you just repeat what you said?
I'm here. You can't hear me?
Oh, now I can.
Okay. When did I cut out there?
Just go back to what you were talking about, because you cut out a little.
Okay, yeah, no, I was just talking about like how even according to objectivism, of which Hellfeld is an alleged proponent of. He knows that these lifeboat scenarios is something that Rand was very critical of. She considered a very cynical, nihilistic attempt to invalidate the ethical inquiry altogether, by setting up very unlikely, impossible situations that don't apply to the struggle of day-to-day life. And she was very critical of that in an article called the Ethics of Emergencies. And this whole Kantian categorical imperative of a series of concrete bound rules. It's bad to lie. It's bad to lie. Rand in objectivist ethics would be the case of what is the context. The context has to be applied to principle. That's true. And to give you an example, should you lie yourself into a job for the purposes of deceiving a person? No. That's by principle. You don't do that. That lying is bad. Would you lie to a would-be kidnapper of your child? Yes, you would. Context is entirely different. It's not situational ethics. It's not pragmatism. It's not ethical relativism, because the principle is to preserve a good, not to take the unearned. To preserve an existing good that's yours by right. Okay, that's the principle. Okay, so lying to a kidnapper is not the same thing as lying for the purposes of deceiving, let's say to get into a job or whatever. And he drops that. He drops context. He gives lip service to it. He'll talk about context and principle, blah, 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 blah. But it's all words. It's white noise. Because he in his arguments, he drops all that. And my attempt was to draw attention to context. Context. I said, well, this wood scenario is one context. This lifeboat out in the water is another context. So no matter how I answered, it was going to be met with criticism. And by proxy, the attempt was to invalidate anarchism. That was the attempt. Subterfuge. But I'd like to hear more of your thoughts, though. I've gone on for quite a while there.
Yeah, well, I had a debate with him last week, which I think you watched, and I mean, one of the things I said to him in the debate is that these questions are not a criticism of anarchy, because they can exist under your scenario too. That these are not unique anarchistic questions. What if one country decides to invade another country? Are you willing to risk that by having a government? I mean, I showed you that great article by Brian Kaplan called Tough Luck. What if the president decides to say people of a certain race should go into camps and they should all be killed? Are you willing to risk that under government? What if this bad thing happens or that bad thing happens? Anyone can dream up horror stories to try to scare other people. We call that a demagogue. A demagogue is someone who uses fear to get people to support his arguments, right? I don't say support anarchy because all these bad stuff are going to happen if you don't. I'm simply saying, is violence justified? Does government commit violence? When is violence justified? Does it matter who does it? And, from principles, it's not. And I said this to Jan during the debate. His argument, essentially, through the entire hour is, boo, boo, and that's it.
Yeah. You don't set up you don't propose to set up a social system based on hypothetical situations of what could happen. You're guided by principle. You're guided by principle. Like, you don't sit there in some kind of like pragmatic relativistic way, sit down and go, well, what if today I don't slap somebody across the face? Let's weigh the pros and cons of that. You guide it by principle, and by reframing, by respecting the NAP. That is your northern ethical compass. But not to beat the much on the issue, though. But do you understand and do you concur with what I was talking about, that ethics is contextual versus being relativistic? It's like if I were to ask you, Daniel.
I think the reason it's okay to lie to the Nazis if you're hiding a Jewish family is because people who violate rights forfeit their own. Right? It's okay for me to kill someone coming at me with a knife, but it's not okay for me to kill you just sitting there peacefully. Why? One is an aggressor and one's not. Well, if it's okay to kill a violent person, it's certainly okay to lie to one to preserve life, which is not near as bad as ending their life, right? So I would argue that people who violate rights forfeit their own.
Exactly. And this is where the NAP is, or the non-aggression principle, is entirely within context. Because it's not an issue of mystically revealed Kantian moral imperatives of thou shall not kill, thou shall not lie. In self-defense, it might come down to it where thou shall has to kill, or thou shall lie, right? But it's context. It's context, So, and that's something that he was completely disregarding. He just wanted. If I shout out to you, Daniel, tell me, Daniel. I mean, I can play this bullshit game too. Daniel, is lying good? Do you think would you endorse lying?
It depends.
Yes or no?
Not as a general rule. Not as a general rule, but it's okay to lie to the Nazis about hiding a Jewish family. It's okay to lie to criminals. If a rapist comes to your house and says, "Where is your daughter home?" It's okay to lie. If the tax collector says, "Do you have any valuables?" It's okay to lie. It may not be smart, but morally you're in the clear.
Oh, I see. So, okay, but so Daniel endorses lying, and he places a moral imprimatur upon it, lying.
No, it's not okay to lie to people who are not violating rights. It's only okay to lie to people who are violating rights in order to protect rights.
Yeah, you see? I can play this.
Murderers to prevent them from murdering. It's okay to lie to thieves to prevent them from stealing. But it's not okay to lie to peaceful people to prevent them from doing peaceful things.
Right, yeah. And so I can take this line of attack, and then if you answer the opposite way, I could attack that too. That's the Hellfeld method. That's his entire one-trick pony way of debating.
And
one of the first. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. He contradicted himself because he says he believes in limited government. But one of the things that he said in his argument is, there'll be all these disagreements on what is a violation of rights. He gave examples of abortion or the age of consent. And yes, people are going to disagree. But you have to have a theory of property rights before you enforce them. You have to have a theory of justice before justice exists. So if you're going to say we need government to protect property rights, you have to know the difference between protecting property rights and what violating property rights are first to know that government does its job. If I sell you a car, you have to know what a car is first, so you know you're not getting a pizza.
Yeah. Hey, listen, the one of the first questions that I asked, the speaking about not answering questions, and his idea of not answering a question if it doesn't come with a stock categorical yes or no, right? So it's it can be followed up with an explanation. But one of the questions that I asked him that I wasn't satisfied with the answer, and maybe you'll recall it. One of my first questions is that governments throughout all of histories have been governments that have ruled without consent, right? He acknowledges that much. We still have those type of governments around now. So now he bases the American conception of government, the American Revolution or whatnot, the Constitution, as a government of consent. All right, I mean, there's problems with that. It's bullshit, of course. But let's run with it for a little while. Okay, Jan supports a government of consent. Far out, groovy. But now let's ask the question, what's the difference between a government that rules without consent and a government that does rule by consent? What is the government doing that's ruling people without consent? What's happening there, right? And he talks about, well, there's no elections. It's just a dictatorial takeover. There's the father handing the government power down to the son, tanks in the streets, or whatever. But the point is that no government can do all of those disasterly things without taxation, without funding itself through violent coercion. And that speaks to all governments. All governments. That's one of the essential characteristics that unites all governments under one basic common definition. However, they can differ on a face level. A lot of different non-essential differences. But if we're looking for a common thread that we can put this into the mental file folder system of government, you have to look down to the essentials. You can't point to a dog and say, well, that's a cat because it has a tail and fur and walks on 4 legs, so therefore that cat is also a dog. No, those are just accidental characteristics. You have to go for something, the genus, or not the genus, but the differentia, rather, from the genus of a definition. And the differentia of government that separates that institution from any other social institution is the initiation of force, and that initiation of force is taxation. So that speaks to the Nazi government, that speaks to the communist government, that speaks to the North Korean government, and that it speaks to the American government. And he just will not acknowledge that. So that's that can be Rand, his acolyte, acknowledges that government's force. That's why she called for, trying to be consistent with her ethical position of non-aggression, of this whole idea of voluntary taxation. So he does not acknowledge that, and it's a contradiction. It's just outright false. It's demonstratively
well, I think he's aware that
false.
Government is force, but there's nothing wrong with force, right? There's wrong with
initiatory,
right. But not force in itself.
Yeah.
Not defensive force.
No. I only speak in terms of initiatory force in defining government.
Mm-hmm. He also seems to have this crazy idea that it's not theft if you get a service in response. So if I go to your house, steal $1,000, and on the way out, mow your lawn and clean your car, I cease to be engaging in theft.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, he said that so much during one of his bits there, where they're providing a service. So of course you have to. Of course they're there to be paid for their service. But if you were to, but that's the whole thing is that So from his standpoint, if you were to renege on paying your taxes, well, then you're violating the rights of the government or government officials. Is probably how he would have it. I know you're distracted by somebody that's walking back and forth on your screen there. I don't know what's going on.
Oh yeah, he's gonna get the fuck out. Don't worry. He's leaving now. This is my roommate. It's expensive here. Um,
Right.
sorry, what were you saying?
Well, yeah. No, I think I wanted to establish that much in my opening statement anyway, is that government is initiatory violence. And my God, you got to work hard. I mean, you got to pull some fancy verbal gymnastics to speak of individual rights on the one hand, but to give a pragmatic excuse for the initiation of violence on the other hand. I mean, I don't envy the person in that position, right?
Mhm.
I mean, they have to go through all these verbal gymnastics to slip away from that,
I
right?
mean, first
You
of
know,
all, first of all, if it's a service you don't want, you don't owe money, and even if it's a service you want, you don't owe money because you get something, right? I mean, if I invite
yeah,
you to my house for dinner, and afterwards I say, okay, I fed you, that cost a lot of money. Here's a check. Here's the bill. You don't have to owe it because there was no agreement beforehand. Typically, if someone invites someone over for dinner, that's as a guest, right? So just eating my food doesn't entitle me to give you a bill afterwards, right? I mean, if a parent, when their child turns 18, they says, "Here's the bill for the clothes and for the school and for all this stuff that I gave you," what child would have to owe that money?
yeah. Tell me if you agree with this. That when you get down to it, though, that not just typical of objectivists, but just typical of minarchists altogether, is that their defensive government, I mean, they'll can talk about individual rights and things like that. The more philosophically inclined ones, who are even to talk about individual rights, limited government advocates or whatnot, as opposed to you're just out and out garden variety status that the government should provide health care and and welfare payments, etc. Blah 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 blah. But your garden variety minarchist, their argument comes down to pragmatism. It always comes down to a utilitarian, common good scenario, pragmatism, because all these disastrous things are going to happen without a government. And yeah, maybe you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Yeah, maybe like you have to initiate that much force anyway. For the provision of these services, we have to force people to taxation for the provision of objective law. And if considered in isolation, law of the laws, let's take this objectivist model of government, where they are applying objective laws and whatnot, and let's say that and they resign themselves to that. But even for the imposition of taxation, even Rand was still against that. But let's say, you go back to the case of a voluntary contributions to the government, would that government hold? If that government were to sustain it by itself by merit alone, that it did become a natural monopolization? Fine, I'm okay with that. However, I just don't see it as something as realistic, though. I don't see that is something that would happen. There would be competitors of other human beings in the provision of the same services.
I mean, it's not
Especially,
really voluntary anyway if they forcibly exclude competitors, right? So let's say I'm the only one who makes bread, and through the threat of violence, I say no one. I'm going to beat anyone up who sells bread. But you don't. If you want bread, you don't have to pay me. But I take voluntary contributions. That's bullshit. It's not voluntary contributions if you forcibly prevent competition. Because Len, if I want bread, you're the only one I can go to now, because you forced, through the use of force, prevented other people supplying me bread. Likewise, if I want to defend myself and you violently prevent other people from doing so, it's not voluntary contributions. That's nonsense.
well, yeah, and this is why maybe you've noticed this. I'm not sure, but that's why I'm such a mad dog on Pythagorean-like precision on definitions. I'm telling you, like, I absolutely agree with Ayn Rand on this. Is that definitions, proper definitions, are the guardians of rationality. They make all the difference in the world whether you're going to yield actual reliable factual knowledge versus chock full of errors and falsehoods if you get your definitions wrong. And that's why it's not. Let's just remove that scenario, just as you did. Let's say that there was voluntary contributions to the government. However, that small handful of people retained their power by voluntary contributions, but they physically prohibited other people from providing the provision of justice services. Then that too, there again is the initiation of force. So this exclusivity is very important, vital part in the definition of defining government that separates from all types of other institutions. Now, as much as anarchists can repeat ad nauseum that government is force, government is initiatory force, government is initiatory force, blah, 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 I do absolutely insist, and I think you even touched on it with the conversation with Walter Block, there's also another very defining essential characteristic of government, and that brings us into the more normative round, is that this force has been legitimatized, or is it attempted to be anyway, because a common criminal or the mafia or whatever, they initiate violence. Let's say you have a band of criminals in the street, they can initiate violence. They're not governments because it hasn't been legitimatized. It hasn't been given that normative stamp of approval, right? So you have those two things going for you that define this institution.
No, I agree. It is the, and I mean, one of the things that I think Jan is missing is, he gives all these scenarios to go to war, and I said this when I interviewed it, when I was in the debate with him. Where are you more apt to go to war? Where other people have to pay for your war, and the costs are socialized, and you can conscript other people to fight, or you have to fight in the war, or use your own money to hire other people to do it. Where in the two scenarios, where are you more likely to go to war? I think you're more likely to go to war when you don't have to risk your life or your own property to do so. So I think there's way more of an incentive for government to go to war, especially when government goes to war. People are afraid and they're willing to sacrifice their liberty and have more government rules. So government has an incentive to go to war where the individual people do not.
Well, yeah, it's part of the nature of the beast. It's just that once you break with principle, you open the gate to hell, where all types of initiation of violence is going to be sprung on people, not only a government's own citizens, but it's not going to confine itself to its geographical boundaries. If it's an initiating violence institution, it's not why. Is there some kind of like principle? I'll initiate violence, but only on this patch of dirt, though. No, you broke principle. So that's why you have that.
I said to Jan, what is stopping the government from taking these guns and instead of protecting you, simply pointing them in your face? And you can't answer that question, and he hasn't answered that question. It's just a faith, this idea, government isn't going to protect me. Government didn't protect all the people in jail due to the drug war. Government didn't protect, hey, now my roommate's back. Government didn't protect people from the drug war. Government didn't protect Eric Garner from selling cigarettes. What?
Is that the living room?
No, I'm in my room.
Oh, okay. Hey, come on in, dude. Yeah.
All right. Anyway.
Hey, what do you think of that whole issue of this chaoticness in an anarchist society where the rules are all willy-nilly and self-canceling and contradictory and one DRO
that they don't agree with?
Sorry?
I mean, if every situation that people give of anarchy is, well, that's insane. Well, if it's insane, don't imagine it existing, right? If something sounds crazy, who's going to agree to that? You've answered your own problem. You answered your own question.
Right. Yeah. And then there's I don't know if you heard my video touching on it. The objectivist objection, anarchistic zombies. Where you have where the charge of objectivists is that anarchists are not necessarily against government necessarily, or they wouldn't, or rather they would. It's a matter of competing It's not about a competition in justice provisions, but a competition in definitions of different vital words like force and rights and so forth. So that specifically comes from the objectivist camp. There would be this epistemological chaos. What initiation of force might mean one thing to me, for somebody else it might be Mother Earth that's being infringed upon, and etc. And as however many people there are in a given civilization or country, that's about how many definitions you're going to have on force. So what you're going to have is an implosion resulting in a apocalyptic bloodbath, right? So, and that is one of the unique specific charges of objectivism. And of course, I have an answer to it or a critique. But are you familiar with that, and have you thought about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. It's certainly possible that under anarchy you're going to have certain areas where people are going to not respect the non-aggression principle. I don't say that under anarchy everyone's going to be peaceful and you're going to and everyone's going to respect rights, but you have more options. You have more communities. It's the argument why the same reason he does not support a one-world government is the same reason I support decentralization. I'm not saying that you're not going to have bad societies, but better that you have a small area oppressing people than a whole entire country that's doing it.
Yeah, no, don't misunderstand. This is probably something really good for you to know, and I hope others who are listening in to hear like the specific charges of what objectivism is going to bring to meet these arguments. I'm not. Of course, it's possible under an anarchist society that there will be initiation of violence and whatnot. There'll be crimes of passion. There will be somebody who wants something for nothing, and there'll be pockets of isolated instances of crime, of course. But what the objectivists are talking about is a apocalyptic explosion. We're talking about Kurt Russell in Escape from New York, or a zombie fest where the entire society just breaks down because there's no monolithic glue holding the whole society together. Okay, here we have a boiling pot. You try to sustain the steam in the pot with a lid. You take that lid off, and which it represents the government, and boom, the explosion takes place because of this rampant zombie-like subjectivism. Mm-hmm. So I'm not talking about this problem and that problem over there, and where you will have problems in any society. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that's what he charges. Like in all of his debates, that's what he's leveling at the objectivist opponent, or the anarchist opponent he's taking on.
I mean, look, most people are not suicidal. And I think because most people are not suicidal, they're not going to engage in behaviors that they see after a pattern are going to be suicidal. I mean, this whole example with Putin is completely idiotic. Only Putin is... I mean, look, suppose you have his realistic. You have Putin, which is a government guy, not anarchist, terrorist-like people, by the way. You have Putin threatening some voluntarist society. Well, they'll go to a bunch of different defense agencies, and the different defense agencies will join together. And look, if Putin is threatening me with $1 million to extort me with $1 million unless I defend myself, I go to the defense agency and I say, I'll pay you money to defend me from this guy. Obviously, there has to be less than he wants to steal from me. Otherwise, I just let him do it. But I want you to protect me. And if they stopping a few defense agencies from having alliances and joining together, and split and share the costs, share the money that I pay for them to get it. So this whole idea that everyone will just sit back and allow themselves to be extorted one after the other, I mean, that's crazy. And why isn't Putin attacking New Zealand now?
Yeah, I'm not talking about foreign invasion. I'm talking about the internal co cohesion of a society. I'm not talking about foreign aggression. I'm talking about in an anarchist society where there's no objective law, where the
What do you
rule
mean?
is the junk law.
Why is objective law whatever government law is? I mean that's just see that's sneaking in conclusions. Objective law is now government law. So for a supermarket not being able to sell whiskey but beer, that's objective law. Being able to sell alcohol but not on Sunday is objective law. Um, Not being able
Hold
to
on for a
park
minute. Hold
now
on
is
for a minute.
objective law.
Hold on. An objectivist could well, yeah. I mean, objective law in this case means a uniformity. I mean, I'm more concerned with if the law is just, not if it's uniform. Yeah, like
Right, and if it's
like
and if it's unjust, we want it as least uniform as possible. I don't want uniform injustice. If the law is
Yeah,
unjust, I don't want uniformity.
yeah.
Right?
But I'm trying to put it to you like this axiomatic given as far in the mind of Hellfeld and just objectivists altogether is that there would be a catastrophic, apocalyptic, wild, irrational subjectivism among the citizens, leaving aside foreign aggression, that a society would simply implode because of the subjectivism, where nobody agrees on what any objective definitions of what force is.
But most people agree already. Most people already agree on what these things are. Most people agree murder is force, rape is force, fraud is force. Yeah, there's disagreement on abortion. There's disagreement on age of consent laws, which is why for those few things where there are disagreements, they're not going to be uniform. Yeah, certain areas you'll be able to get an abortion, in certain areas you probably won't. You know, age of consent laws can be different in different places. I mean, every time a government has a disagreement with another government, they don't go to war, and they have actually more of an incentive to go to war, and yet they don't every time there's a disagreement. So why would DROs, who have to use their own resources to go to war, engage every time there's a dispute? He's just the reason behind it.
Beautiful. Yeah. Now that's kind of what I was looking for, is that common sense. Yeah. Even in today, yeah. I know sometimes we figure that we have to get all very ivory tower in the answer, though. But if you just like refer to the empirical reality that most people know what aggression is. Somebody knows when their shit is being stolen. Somebody knows when somebody's coming at them with a knife that they're not. It's not a bouquet of flowers.
Yeah.
Right. So. I'm going to fucking kill you. This is bad for me. That's just aggression, right? Now, where all you do have these differences, like aggression from the Zeitgeist movement. Aggression means the candy clerk who tried to upsell me from a small Coke to a large Coke. You know, oh, I'm being aggressed against because somebody's trying to sell me shit. I'm being aggressed against. You know? And or then you have the environmental movement that where humanity's aggressing against Mother Earth. Oh, it's aggression, right? So those belong to a small fringe, a small faction of people, a small fringe ideological lunatics. That does not speak to the common person. It does not speak to the common person. And I'm going to do a video and a follow-up on this myself on the debate with Hellfeld, and I will cover the fact that even in our current state of society, what could be designated as pretty a widely irrational society, people still know the difference between a mafia, the mafia, and that it's or street gangs, that its activities are illegitimate. People acknowledge that, right? But in a society, if we were to reach an anarchist, stateless society, that would be due to a philosophical revolution, not because of not by default, like you have in where the government collapsed in what's that country that everybody keeps on talking about over and over again as a charge against anarchy?
Somalia?
Yeah, where you have collapsing government by default. No, we're talking about a kind of rational anarchism here, where if there was ever to be a complete social overhaul, or one that was gradual, it would be based on a philosophical revolution, where
Right. And
individual rights are.
one of the things, sorry to interrupt, but one of the things that Jan
Yeah,
doesn't seem to understand is the only way you even get any type of society is if the majority of the people have those values already. So the only way you're going to have a limited government is if the majority of the population believes in the limited government ideology. And once they do, you know, at least for some time, you're going to live in a world where people have that ideology. So it's not just tomorrow the government is going to just appear. The way you have an anarchist society is if most people have anarchist values,
yeah,
which
no,
means you don't have to worry about all this clash, because the only way you're going to get the society that we envision is if most people are there, which is why we're not saying destroy the government tomorrow. We're saying let's persuade people that anarchy is the way, and once they're persuaded, we know how they're going to act because they have that mentality.
yeah, no, exactly. You know, and even Molyneux talks a lot about this. You know, where the evolution of the species, the potential is there anyway to reach the point where that anybody who starts taking seriously the idea of government, like, hey, let's all band together and take over and use force and just have a cartel, a concentration of power. I mean, this might sound very strange to somebody 100 years from now, where it's kind of like, well, what are you talking about, right? Just like you have, if somebody were to say today, man, we got to get those niggers under tow, man. Like, just think of the wealth that we could produce, and if we had slave labor, and if it was the black guys, you know, like we should really let's sit down and talk about this idea. Like, how would you, you know, in today's society, I mean, you're an asshole. You're an asshole. So I think that anybody who really takes the ideas, it starts describing a government, let's say, and everything that entails, there can be a time where that person will be like this guy's a psychotic. You know, he's got some very bizarre ideas, man. I don't want anything to do with that guy, right? So all of these views, they're not a given. They're not woven in the fabric of reality or of our moral makeup as human beings. They're all artificially imposed. All of these ideas, gods, governments, they're all artificially imposed, and they're false.
Yeah. Now
Yeah.
you
So
talked about, I think this is where we disagree somewhat. I think because you talked about the evolution of the species, and you know, I take human beings as they are. I don't believe that anarchy can exist. This sounds very utopia to me, that, you know, we're going to have an anarchist society and people are going to behave better, and we have to change human nature. I take human beings as they are. And I think any ideology which attempts to change human beings is going to be disappointing. So I'm not trying to mold human beings from who they are. I take human nature as it's given. I don't believe in this blank slate theory that, you know, that people could just be molded and manipulated to change from their essential characteristic.
yeah, no. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. No, I'm not suggesting like the Marxists would that you first change the social system and then human nature adapts to that model, to that social system, which they attempted to do, to try to make unselfish man, sharing proletariat man, right? Of course not. Of course not. No, I'm not talking about using anarchism as some kind of ideology that is going to reprogram people. When I'm talking about a moral evolution, I'm speaking within the realm of morality. The ethics of non-aggression is something that can be applied to our lives as it is even in the existing society. We can take that as a moral principle in the existing society, and we do. But if we were to take that and apply it consistently, then that leads us down the pathway of anarchism as a social whole, right? But it's a matter of the individual, by his own free will, adopting the principle and then applying it consistency. If you apply that principle consistently, a lot of people came to anarchism because via Ayn Rand, who spoke voluminously on non-aggression. So when people followed the bouncing ball and connected the dots, there's a lot of people who came to anarchism via the transmission belt of objectivism in her ethic and the ethics in the ethical realm. And some people haven't made that connection yet, obviously, when it was applied to politics, but a lot of people have, right? Now, in regards to human nature, my whole view of human nature, basically, that man is not innately depraved, and he's not innately good. He has free will. He has a volitional consciousness. He has the capacity to be either good or bad. So the human nature is just merely the template of that capacity.
Hmm?
The moral is the chosen.
I don't disagree with that, but I also am a big believer in the, I think if you look throughout history, human beings don't change very much. So I think that this idea that, that's one of the reasons that I've sort of rejected a lot of objectivism, because I think that objectivism requires too much of people. It assumes that everyone is going to be purely rational and think through every single thing before they do it. They ignore the fact that certain people are just emotional creatures. It's sort of like, Mises criticizing this whole idea of economic man, that people think only of profit and they don't have any ideology. I think that's sort of the problem with objectivism. It's, rational man, and every guy thinks before they act, and they take inventory of their values, and people are not emotional. I don't think Ayn Rand was describing a lot of the ways a lot of people work. Michael Huemer has a great article called "Why I'm Not an Objectivist" that I sort of agree with a lot of his criticism. I'll send you the link if you want, where it's basically that it's not really akin to human nature, really.
Oh yeah, no. What I would tend to agree with you. Like this whole idea of tabula rasa, that man begins at birth as a total blank slate, and he has inherited any Paleolithic underpinnings from his ancient ancestry at all, is ridiculous. Ridiculous. I don't agree with that at all. Yeah. So there's a layered sandwich there of an evolutionary chain that we take a lot of junk with us along with the good. Right? But that's the whole point of ethics, though, as a moral compass. We are not animals where we're just guided by instinct, and we just have this rotation type of life where we fly south for the winter, or we gather chestnuts, or whatever. Whether it's just a cycle, it's just a repeated cycle with the lower animal species. We have a volitional consciousness, and we can recognize these things about ourselves, right? The very things that we're talking about are things that we can fully acknowledge. And we have the capacity of, because we are beings of a volitional consciousness, that's why we have ethical codes. We just don't rely on instinct or brute force like the animal kingdom does. The animal kingdom just relies on instinct, and they devour one another just to survival. Okay, that's where you get this law of the jungle analogy, right? But human beings are entirely different species, right? So that's why you need an ethical code as a guide, as a conduct, as a compass in your life, and that we are fully capable of. And there has been strides where the human spirit has shot forward and have left the dreck behind. Mm-hmm. I would say that the American Revolution itself, the whole concept, the development of property rights, the very conception of individual rights, or the very conception of the non-aggression principle, and the very moral disgust of the idea of plantation slavery, to overthrow that and then adopt debt slavery instead, right? It's a progression, right?
No, I agree. I agree.
We'll have to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think because I like when Jan interviews pundits and the people and the media whores and politicians, and his it's like he's a different person when he's arguing for for people who are more status, when he's arguing with people who are less status than himself. He doesn't really engage in, can you delegate a right you do not have? Can you live well if people can legally gang up on you? Is it possible to live by moral principles without intentionally violating it? And all these other things. It's more, scenarios of horror stories. And anyone can do that. I mean, if you say you're against the welfare state, you'll get horror stories. Well, and old people are going to be eating cat food, and people are going to be more poor, and there'll be all this crime because of the increased poverty, and, you can play this game all day.
Well, yeah, no, I think that's very revealing about that. I did watch your video of your critique of your interview when he interviewed you. When you give that very same critique of that he applies he's a man of principle of those debates or in those confrontations anyway with politicians, but he has an entirely other tactic. When he's dealing with anarchists, though, he switches up completely, and all of a sudden, Jan Helfeld, the man of consistent objectivist principles, all becomes utilitarian, pragmatic, Hobbesian man. So for me, for me that's like the telltale sign of a sophist. Somebody who just wants to trip you up, who uses debate and argument as a linguistic tool, as a rhetorical tool, as a manipulative tool, as a conniving, deceiving tool. And that certainly is not a person of principle. I mean, they can sound perfectly rational in some contexts, but it's a very keen observation, I think, and very accurate. And I think it's very revealing of his character. The man's white. He's wound up pretty too. You can see it in all his facial expressions and body language.
So you're saying you're a fan of him.
But you know what?
That's what you're saying.
Yeah. You know how just digressing on something where we're talking about, I did a video once where I was talking about that there's a dichotomy within objectivism where a great deal of their influence comes from two opposing philosophers, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. In this, and both had talked about the state of nature. With Thomas Hobbes, government restores society, and you'll see that in a lot of the objectivists, right? One objectivist diehard recently posted on one of my video in the commentary section something like, anarchists equals society, oxymoron, or something like that, right? That's a very Hobbesian perspective, that society would not be possible were it not for government. Right? Whereas with Locke, however, society is already a given. Society is already a given. Where Locke calls for government, though, is that given that people are, for the most part, decent, they're not this jungle law, psychopathic Hobbesian man, human beings already, for the most part, are reasonable and rational. So therefore, for optimization of society, they delegate their rights to a government to settle disputes peacefully, and they realize that they're willingly delegating their rights, being rational creatures to begin with, that they would do that, right? Whereas in the Hobbesian framework, the government is to be imposed, period, and we better get quick to it here and now, because the irrational man will go cockle crazy wild, right? So both subscribe to a theory of government, both have a certain speak of the state of nature, but both are fundamentally opposed in those two ways. And the objectivists take from both philosophers. They take from both philosophers. The objectivists will talk about individual rights. They will talk about reason as an attribute of the individual. They'll talk about all that. But then you also have this very ugly Hobbesian underbelly side that comes into a lot of their dialogue. And it's something that I hone my eyes, and whenever I see commentary from there, I can see the premises just jumping up and going here, Hobbesian premise, right? So you know, it's rich with a lot of examples. It's something I want to do a video on and just focus on a little bit more, you know. But because I'm a philosophy geek, so I admit it.
Anything else you want to say? Because
I guess it was a good chat. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for having you on. We'll do this again sometime.
Okay, talk to you later.
Talk to you later.